Hi, Tamara. Um, Thank you for the response. Uh, I think it's mildly kind of a mix of amusing and seriousness. On the one hand, I think there may be some misunderstanding, uh, specifically when I say that I will never accept a job in the helping field. I truly mean that. Um, I I am never ever going to be a mandatory reporter ever, and so I suppose maybe the misunderstanding and why you were taken back by that statement is that I'm in this degree plan, um, and I suppose a reasonable person will that if I'm in this degree plan that I'm planning to work in that field, and that is simply not the case. Um, I am not in this degree plan because I want to be a counselor. I'm not in this degree plan because I intend to seek a job in counseling or anything uh, as a social worker, anything along those lines. In fact, I have a great deal of mistrust, and I'll expound on that uh, later. But the reason why I explained in my intro video why I'm in this degree plan, and that is because uh, all of my life I have felt uh, felt called to be a missionary, um, and I'm headed down that path. Uh, So I was talking to my brother. My brother has done, bachelor's and master's degree in, I don't know, pastoral studies or something like that. And I asked him whether I should go to Bible school, and he just kind of laughed at me. He said, no, you've done through individual study, personal study, what way more than I did in college, and it would be a waste of your time and money. Um, but knowing, he's I believe currently a youth minister, and he works on the worship team at his church, and he writes a lot of the backing tracks for them, things like that. He's very very gifted in music, and he absolutely loves it. Um, actually, I don't. He may not be working with the youth group anymore. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. But so he did say, he said, one caveat to what I said to you, and that is that ironically, the one thing I actually needed was the thing I didn't get hardly at all. In He's talking about his degree plans that he did, and that was training and counseling. So he recommended that I take a course or two. And of course, with my personality and the way I overdo things all the time, I enrolled in an entire degree plan, um, which I don't regret. Although, I mean, as I quite frankly said in the collaborate, this I have very little interest in this class. If it wasn't part of the degree plan, I would not have enrolled in it, and that is because to me, the word ethics is a dirty word. Me, when we talk about ethics, what we're really talking about is humankind's attempt to define right and wrong without God. That's what ethics means to me. That when we use the word ethics, in my mind, what we're talking about is humanity's attempt to define good and evil without God. So to me, ethics is a dirty word, and I do not want anything to do with it. Uh, in that frame, from a different point of view, I also teach hunter education for my home state of Idaho. I haven't been able to do that in quite a while. Part of the reason is because of COVID, but every year for the last 4 or 5, 6 years, yeah, every year for about the last 6 years, I have taught hunter education classes, um, And part of that curriculum is a section on ethics, specifically hunting ethics. And part of that curriculum is that we emphasize, and most of my students are children, but I guess about a third of my students are adults, and about 2/3 are children. And usually the adults are there because their kids are in the class, and so they just take it with their kids. But we emphasize to them that if something is a law, if the state has taken and created a hunting law that says you cannot do XYZ, that is not an ethic. That is a law. So when we're sitting here in this class talking about mandatory reporting and legal requirements, in my mind, that's not ethics. We're not studying ethics, we're studying laws. So ethics are things that I've determined is right and wrong for me, but you may have a completely different opinion, and that's perfectly fine because the law hasn't defined it. That's ethics. And so that's why I have issues when we get into this subject, because I have a very, very different perception and definition of ethics than what we're actually studying in this class. To me, we're not actually studying ethics in this class. That's my opinion. So um, so going back to why I will never, ever, 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 ever be a mandatory reporter. I grew up in Senegal, West Africa, and growing up, I learned very quickly a deep mistrust for any type of legal authority, because the legal authorities were not there to help you at all. They were there to exploit you. Um, and quite often to your harm. So I have a very, very deep-seated mistrust that goes all the way back to my childhood of any sort of legal authority, whether it be the police or the state governments or federal government or you know, in my mind, if I were reporting suspected child abuse, in my mind, what I'm actually doing is I am putting the victim at risk of further harm. Because in my mind, what I'm actually doing is I'm reporting to someone else a situation where they can now go and exploit this family and rip them apart, and uh, those suspected abused children are going to end up in a system where actually greater harm is going to come to them. And so I do not have any belief, faith, or trust in this system to do more good than harm. And in fact, I believe quite the opposite about the system. I believe that the system does more harm than good, and in many times intentionally so, because of political ideologies and political, prosecutors who just need to have numbers so they can look good and get elected and then build their careers, and they have no care whatsoever for the people they're exploiting. Um, have very, very deep-seated feelings about that. So this is why I will never, ever, 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 ever be in a position to be a mandatory reporter.